Welcome. Today I'd like to talk about Citrix running on the Scale Hyper Converged Infrastructure platform. This is not officially a supported platform by Citrix, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about the practical implications of what works versus what's supported. A little background on me. My name is Andrew Schmidt. I'm a Senior Business Transformation Engineer at the Ingram Business Transformation Center. And today I'm going to talk about some of the issues when we're running unsupported deployments and why you might choose to do so anyway. If you're not familiar with Scale, I'm going to provide an introduction to some of their products and as well as show some demos around Citrix running on Scale here in the Business Transformation Center. So what are the potential issues with running an unsupported Citrix deployment? Well, let me start off here in saying I'm not recommending unsupported deployments for critical production environments. All right, I'll always recommend it publish best practices for any deployments. All right. That being said, there are situations where it may make sense. So what are the issues? The single biggest one is that it just may not work at all. All right. There are reasons why compatibility testing is done. And sometimes you'll get into issues with drivers, et cetera, et cetera. But in this case, with my experience so far with Scale, I have not had any issues. Support from Citrix is probably the biggest concern. All right, and that's why people look at supported platforms. That's why they call us for advice on architecture, right? Because they want to make sure they have a supported solution. In most cases, you run into the kind of response like this, Mark. Can you reproduce the issue in a supported configuration? So if you choose to use something unsupported and you run into any kind of problem, you're not going to be able to get support on that platform. You're probably going to need to reproduce the configuration in something supported, all right, to be able to get support from Citrix, which is honestly pretty typical with most vendors. You may see some loss of functionality. Not all components may work, certain features may not work. In the case of Scale, the single biggest one is provisioning. All right, so whether we're talking machine creation services or provisioning services, and in both those cases, that really is tied to the lack of power management. The delivery controller, so the Citrix control plane, does not know how to talk to the underlying hypervisor for Scale. All right, so it cannot remotely power on, power off machines. So that very much is a concern from an image management standpoint, scaling, etc. So why might we want to do it anyway? Most common ones are it's a demo environment. We're doing some sort of evaluation or proof of concept. And from that standpoint, I sort of look at it as being similar to a Citrix virtual apps and desktop single server deployment. Okay, which is, if you're not familiar, we're putting all of the infrastructure components on a single server versus, best practice says two delivery controllers, two storefront servers, highly available SQL database, etc. But a single server deployment is in fact actually supported for small production environments. Okay, so again, unsupported platform is not supported, period. All right, but in some of these use cases, especially evaluation or POC, it may be a decent choice, and that actually leads us into the next one, where you might actually have infrastructure in place already. So maybe you're considering Citrix. Maybe you're having some app delivery issues. You've got people who are looking for a better remote access solution. So you've got Scale in place already, and you want to test it out with what you've got before you make an investment in a quote supported infrastructure. The other use case is very often it's a temporary solution. We've all had those issues with end user customers where something is critical, they have to do something now. They're aware that they're looking at an unsupported configuration, and the roadmap says they will be getting a supported infrastructure, but they need something now. All right, so we might deploy in this manner in an unsupported use case just to get them something because they've got a critical issue. And then finally, one of the big drivers is budget. All right, and we can look at this from two different directions. First is the overall solution cost. All right, there may be a budget where the use case is there, but the budget just not does not allow for a supported solution. Okay, whether that's another HCI vendor, whether that is traditional server and shared storage. Maybe it's an issue where they'd like to go to cloud, but the ongoing OpEx is going to be a challenge. Okay, or they need certain features. In some cases, you might need certain capabilities. For example, the shared storage capabilities that you get with HCI, but another solution is out of your budget. All right, I go back to my old server storage days, where in a lot of cases you ended up with a lot more horsepower in a server than you might need if you wanted to get the capability for redundant power supplies, for example. Okay, so a lot of times the features we need will drive our infrastructure choices. Now, if you're not familiar with Scale, I'm going to do a quick introduction. So the obligatory, what is hyperconvergence? And the whole idea is that our compute, our storage, as well as the hypervisor that brings it together is all part of a single solution. When we talk about the Scale HC3 architecture, one of the biggest things is they talk about is simplicity. Management is very straightforward. The deployment is very quick. All right, there's an initial startup call you need to do with Scale, but once that's done, it's very easy to do. You've got the capability for backup and replication to other Scale solutions, which as a partner could lead you into a DR as a service solution. Okay, and by definition, you've got high availability. They also support some interesting configurations. They will actually support single node configurations. So again, back to that budget, okay, or a special immediate need, you could start with a single node and then scale that out later. And they actually support mixed configurations. So if your storage needs change, your compute needs change, you can add additional nodes, but maintain the original cluster. You do not have to break out a new cluster just because you're changing a platform. And again, no additional software licensing fees. That is part of the actual stack. So when you buy the appliance, you get the license along with it. And so everything you need, very straightforward, very simplified. So just got to call out a couple of new features in recent release. Storage deduplication, increasing your storage capabilities. Already mentioned the single node configuration. And then a lot of the features that we'd expect to see in terms of snapshotting, automation, more detail on what's going on with the storage. So if we need to add additional storage, we have a better idea of whether we need more on the performance side or more on the capacity side. One thing I have not seen in a lot of other implementations is they give you a very good idea of what your overall IOPS usage is. Okay, so what you're consuming out of the cluster. And again, that helps very much with scalability, all right, making your next choices. Coming from a background in VDI, IOPS is the bane of VDI. And so it's definitely something that we need to be aware of. And if we go back to that evaluation or proof of concept, we can actually get some data around, well, what are our actual workloads going to look at when we move out to scale? Single node configuration, they really talk about it from the idea of either from a distributed enterprise standpoint or a DR solution. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the next slide here. And honestly, we can flip flop this either way. So we can look at, I've got my multi-node cluster in my primary site, and then I have a secondary site, which maybe I'm doing backup. Or we can flip that around and say maybe I'm hosting at my quote primary data center, a unit to do backup for what's out in the field, and then I've actually got multi-node out in those other sites. But it gives me a lot of flexibility because I can do a lot of my management local. When we talk about from a VDI or an app delivery standpoint, build and maintain my base images, and then use the inherent replication capabilities to get those updated images out to my other sites. Target is really a small to medium organization, okay, whether we look at it from a storage standpoint or a number of users. Again, very cost effective, and with multi-site distributed enterprises, it's a very good fit. Now, I'm one of the takeaway messages today is going to be about Citrix Cloud and multi-site. And when we think about the fact that we may need certain applications running site local for users because they've got requirements around response times. A perfect example would be manufacturing. Well, I can't do process control with virtualized apps. Well, absolutely you can if those applications are running local. So you get reduced latency, you get the response times that you need. So we've got a lot of potential applications when we look at distributing that compute where it's needed. Now I'm going to move into a demo of the scale cluster that we've got here in the Business Transformation Center. It is a 3-node cluster. You can see the nodes highlighted here. Their individual IP addresses, the amount of free RAM on each node. At the top in this handy little dashboard, we see that we're using 6% of the overall CPU, 20% of the overall RAM, etc. I can switch the view on each node to look at the storage. Now we're going to see both the regular capacity drives, right? The SAS drives that are installed. There are 3 drives, and then we also have an SSD in each node. All right, so that SSD is going to be used as performance storage, and the HCI software will move data as necessary out to those capacity drives. Down in the lower pane, we can see the machines that are currently running. Anything that's in white is running. These are my desktop OS systems, as then my server OS systems. Tags are very easy, so it's very easy to keep track of what you've got. You can search by your tags. We have a lot of configuration settings right from here. It's very easy to create a new VM or import a VM from another location. We'll look at my settings. I get my audit logs right up front. Are there any current alerts? If I need to shut down the entire cluster, I can do that. There is a local media store, which makes it very easy to build images because I can just upload those ISOs and then have them available. Remote cluster, so when we're talking about remote management as well as backup, whether we're just doing replication or DR, scheduling for snapshots, SSL certificates, so I can get rid of the security bang on my browser here, and then my users, and there is not full RBAC role-based access control, but we can do a little bit of management. So we can easily put people into a view-only, a read-only view. All right, so we can give people access and they can see what's there. We can give them limited access. When I look at my VMs, I can launch console right from here. From a performance standpoint, RDPing directly to that machine is a little bit better. I've had no issues with the console, but that was a recommendation from Scale. We can see the virtual devices on this. As needed, I can add additional network, etc. Any snapshots that I might have. And again, very, very simple and straightforward. So as I mentioned here, I've got my VDI, my desktops running here, which I am using for VDI. And then I've got some backend servers. So kind of the important ones for what we're going to be talking about in our next little demo is these cloud connectors. So these are my Citrix cloud connectors. So what I'm delivering via Citrix, I'm doing via Citrix Cloud. So all I needed to do was set up these two connectors versus the 8 to 9 standalone VMs that I would need if I do a traditional Citrix build out. Now I'd like to show you how the scale cluster that we've got here in the Business Transformation Center integrates with Citrix Cloud and allows me to deliver virtual desktops out to users. From the Citrix Cloud side, we are going to start with the administrative view first, and we're going to be looking at virtual apps and desktops. I'm going to go into manage that. So this is Citrix Studio running on Citrix Cloud. And I can see my machine catalogs here, my scale app servers, which right now is just a single machine, as well as my scale VDI systems, which are currently 5 machines. Now, if I go into hosting here, you are going to see some of the other infrastructure that I'm using. So here in the hosting view, I can see some of my other infrastructures. I've got some Zen server running. I've got some vSphere on HPE SimpliVity, as well as another Zen server implementation. What's missing? Well, it's missing is scale because we can't talk directly to the hypervisor. So how do we actually work with unsupported hypervisors? When we look at it from a machine catalog standpoint, the thing that we need to call out is that the provisioning method is manual, and that's actually what I'm doing in some other environments as well, which means I'm not doing machine creation services. I'm not doing provisioning services. So I'm highlighting my app servers here. I've only got one in use. If I would go in and edit that, really what we're going to see, or if I'd create it, we're going to see that I don't have power management on these. All right, so I can I can set up a machine catalog and say I don't want to do power management. And the most obvious one would be remote PC access. Okay, so if you've used remote PC access, typically this would be a physical desktop. You'd install the Citrix VDA, point it to your delivery controllers or your cloud connectors in the Citrix Cloud case, and you usually will not have power control. So yes, with remote PC access, you could do Wake on LAN, okay, but to do that, you need Microsoft SCOM running, System Center Operations Manager running to be able to do that Wake on LAN. So in most cases, unless you've got SCOM in place already, you're not going to be doing it for remote PC access. Okay, so really, when we look at it from an app delivery standpoint, Server OS, very common to lock down. Users are not administrator. They're not going to be able to go in and inadvertently shut that server off, right? Much more common use case in desktops, especially for persistent desktops, which again, since I can't talk to the hypervisor, I can't use MCS or PVS, which means I'm going to do persistent desktops. Pretty much my only option, because from a Citrix standpoint, it looks like remote PC access. So yeah, absolutely, users could go in and inadvertently power off that desktop. All right, so obviously I would not want to do this for large scale. Again, from an evaluation or proof of concept, probably not a big deal. If I'm looking at, I've got this desktop here for remote administration, and I'm using it as a jump box, probably not a big deal. I'm probably an expert user. All right. Just wanted to show something here on delivery groups. I actually have multiple domains running here. So scale is its own domain, the SimpliVity is its own domain, and then everything else is another domain. And you may not think about that, but that can work very well if you've got multiple isolated instances. I was working recently with a partner, and one of the questions was the end user customer was doing a lot of acquisitions. And one of the things that we're asking about is, when you do an acquisition, do you integrate them into your Active Directory environment, or do you keep them as standalone? And I asked that question because I've seen it go both ways. But one of the things that I have definitely seen with organizations that do acquisitions with the idea of later spinning that off, they will typically keep those as separate organizations. I've also had seen situations where one part of the company has to do business with another part of the company, and then for compliance or regulatory reasons, they have to be separate entities, all the way down to users, so they can't be in the same forest. All right, so Citrix Cloud make that very easy because I can have multiple isolated domains. One last thing I want to show from this view is our resource locations. And specifically for this scale BTC, I see my cloud connectors, and the green shows me that everything is fine in that environment. Now I'd like to launch a desktop here for you. And so now I've gone out to the gateway service for our Citrix Cloud account. I'm going to log in with credentials, and as you can see, I'm on the scale domain. So this is going to be into that infrastructure, so I'll be presented with the resources that are running on our scale infrastructure. So recently, you can see I've launched my desktop recently, but I do have some other applications available. It's been a while since I've logged in, so it's going to take a moment to get all the icons up and running. And then I have both my VDI desktop running Windows 10 as well as a hosted shared desktop. So let's go ahead and launch our desktop here. And now I'm on my VDI desktop running on the scale infrastructure. Now, if I would toggle back to our cluster here, we should have taken notes about what utilization I had, but remember that was down around 20. You can see it's significantly higher. If I go back and launch a process over here, let's go ahead and get something up and running. Now, as that GIMP launches in the background, look at my CPU jumping up here, as well as my IOPS usage, the amount of disk that I'm going through. So you can see, absolutely, this is actually, and yes, I've pegged the CPU. All right, so you can see that this does work. I can run that desktop. Again, I've connected to it via Citrix Cloud. I'm managing it via Citrix Cloud. If I really wanted to, I could go ahead and shut it down, and you can see on the infrastructure side that it shuts down there as well. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this was informative. If you have any follow-up, please reach out to us. Thank you.